It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. You can get a hold of me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting if you email me at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Okay, our guest today is Penn. She's been here many times. This is probably the fourth time. This is probably the fourth time. So I would tell the audience, go to Spreaker.com and search in there Penn, Opperman Report. One of her last books we had her on here about the Golden State Killer, which she's like an expert on. Endgame, the most dangerous game, the Golden State Killer. But she's got a brand new book out. I normally say the ink's not even dry yet, but I don't even think the ink's been printed on this one yet. We got it before the printing.
It's close.
Time travel we have it with Penn. The newest book is Serial Killers Victims. Families Wait for Answers. The Killers and Their MOs. The Green River Killer, Ted Bundy, Zodiac Killer, the Golden State Killer, she's an expert, and BTK and more. Penn. Penn, are you there?
Yes. How are you today?
Great. So great to have you back. Thank you so much for scheduling me on such short notice, too. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Remind the audience who is Penn.
Remind you of who I am? Is that what you want to talk about?
Yeah, remind the audience, because you've been here before.
Yeah. Well, I took a little break last year, was kind of doing some writing with trying to do my hand at fiction, which I did Dissecting Dexter, which was kind of a homage to that particular character. And then I also have a couple of interests that I wanted to continue sort of researching and investigating, which is really I wanted to talk to victim family members and talk about cold cases that are still unsolved. I like to get that out there to law enforcement and let them take a look at some of the cases that have DNA to be tested. And I kind of nudge them and push a little bit to see if they'll take the case on and do that. There have been a couple solved that were in serial slaughter, one of the books I wrote in 2021. And so that was great. It was 50 years in the making. They solved the Nancy Benelek case. And then there's just others that are just yelling to be solved. There's a few that have really kind of tugged at me all along and would like to see them solved before their relatives are not here anymore.
What do you think it is that makes these cases go dormant and fall between the cracks and become unsolved for such a long time?
Well, of course, back in the day, forensics wasn't in place, so, they had so many cases they had to deal with, especially all over the country in the 70s. There were, the statistics on crime were just climbing through the roof. They finally leveled off in the 80s and started to come down. But it was insane all over the country in the 70s with different kinds of serial cases. Law enforcement had their hands full. They had plenty to do. They had to move on to the next case. So, but now they can go back and arrest the people who were responsible 30, 40, 50 years ago.
I know you work directly with a lot of these cold case detectives. How receptive are they to these armchair investigators on podcasts and on message boards, these true crime fans that like to go in there and try and solve these things themselves?
Well, what's interesting is I have no idea as far as how they react to other people. Yeah. I've been able to, get them to talk to me when I've called about, let's say, the Zodiac cases in San Francisco, or I've talked to different Roseville law enforcement along the way, which is back in the area where the Golden State Killer was active and lived, in the Roseville and Rancho Cordova areas of Sacramento. Also, I've been able to meet up in Lake Tahoe area to talk about the Donna Lass cases. So they've been really receptive to me, which has been great, but I don't know how they are with others. So anyway, it works.
A little hit and miss, yeah. So serial killer victims, families wait for answers, the killers and their MOs. What are we going to find in this new book?
Well, like I said, it's basically what I'm looking to do is call attention to some cold cases that are still needing to be solved, and that there is DNA. I do always say there is DNA in this case to be tested. It's what it says in the reports. I go through old newspaper articles, historical information, and I just really follow the story. And this time what I wanted to do and have been working on is talking to some of the victims' family members, because it matters what they think or how they feel. It's difficult to wait 40 years, 50 years to find an answer. So that's what I'm about, is trying to help. I'm a victim's advocate. And so that's really it. But I'm also one of those people who was fascinated about why people become a serial killer, what makes them think they have the right to take someone's life the way they do. And it's an addiction, I think. I'm an addiction specialist. So, I've just kind of been fascinated with the whole thing. And as you know, there was a murder in the family that I'm in as well. So it's sort of like I was just always fascinated. Even before that happened, I was fascinated by Zodiac, the Manson. I'm a California person. I was born in Sacramento. So all these cases, you hear them in the news from the time you're a kid. And so I always was interested. My dad is a criminalist type, and my uncles one of them worked in Sacramento County during the East Area Rapist crimes in they called it the fingerprint and composite department at the time instead of the forensics department. That's how old that is, back in the 70s. So.
Yeah, back in the 70s and the very early 80s, fingerprint technology was not even close. I worked at a PI office, and that's one of the things he did, too, was fingerprint expert and the handwriting expert, and he was a ballistics expert, too, as well. He did a lot of stuff, as well as counter surveillance. He did a lot of counter surveillance, too.
Oh, neat.
Remind the audience, though. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it seems like it's a genetic thing. I mean, my family's peppered with law enforcement types, and then I, of course, have been rather fascinated and obsessed myself. So, and you just mentioned that with your family, too.
Well, it was my family. I worked for him. He was my employer.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he was like a father to me.
I worked for... Go ahead.
Yeah, he was like a father to me, though, really. He taught me so much, man. He was so patient.
Oh, very
cool.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Remind the audience, so what was your family? There was a murder in your family. What was that?
The Golden State Killer, back in 1980, my grandfather, I lived in Sacramento. My grandparents lived in Sacramento, right down the street, really, from me, about a mile away. And so I was around them a lot as a child for 30 years or so. But back in 1980, my grandfather's son and his wife were murdered by the Golden State Killer. It used to be called the original Night Stalker. And we didn't know until from 1980 until 2001 that the East Area Rapist was actually the Golden State Killer, and that it was the same guy, and he was the serial killer. And so that was the Smith murders. So that affected my grandfather, of course, and I was right there up close. I mean, he used to make me breakfast on Sundays, was always there at their house for all the holidays and in between, and just it was one of my favorite places to be. So watching him go through that was not an easy task.
Yeah, it's one thing to lose a relative, but it's another thing to lose him to murder,
Yeah, and then to not know. He found out that it was the Golden State Killer, which is what he was renamed, but the original Night Stalker, East Area Rapist. We were in Sacramento. My grandparents were right there the whole time the East Area Rapist was attacking, and I have relatives who live off La Riviera and Watt, the American River area, which is where he was attacking a lot. So they were there. We were there the whole time, and then to find out that the murder of his son and daughter-in-law, Charlene and Lyman Jr. really was really horrific, but he did find out that it was connected before he died. He was almost 93 in 2001.
Man, my dad's 93 now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, did you discuss this family murder in your books, like Endgame, The Most Dangerous Game, Golden State Killer, and your other books about the Golden State Killer?
Just a little bit in passing. I wrote in Endgame about why I had, to write about this, why I was obsessed with these cases. I needed to know what else he did, what other murders, besides what law enforcement and the media say. Right now, of course, back in 2020 when I published this book, it was because they had just completed sentencing for D'Angelo. And it was one of those things that I was just sort of watching the case, go through courts, etc., that he pled guilty to all these horrific crimes. It took him more than 8 hours to talk about what he had done and say, guilty and I admit. And it was just a horrific day for all the victims that were listening to this as the court read each case. And then he pled guilty and I admit, and I was just like, I was sick by the time the end of the day came. But that's what this book is. It's about how he pled guilty and what he pled guilty to, what he did, what he committed, what crimes he committed, and then the fact that they tried to contain the story, and they still have. It's very limited. They say he was active from 1973, I believe, until 1986. It's about 12, 13 years. And then they act like he only killed 13 people, when in fact it's a lot of people's contention, and mine as well, that he had to have been killing people, from the 60s on, when he was a teenager probably, and he never stopped until they caught him, because there was a murder in Tulare County in 2017 of a woman who had been on the pro boards and talked about this case, and she was murdered December of 2017. And that has never been solved. And that, again, was in Tulare County, which is where he worked in Exeter as a cop and where his family lived. And so it's like, really, you're only trying to tell us that he was only active for 12 years, when in fact there's all these unsolved cases, and that's why I do what I do.
Wait, so D'Angelo was the Green River Killer, right?
He was the what?
The Green River Killer?
No, D'Angelo is the Golden State Killer.
Golden State Killer.
Gary Ridgway is the Green River Killer.
Okay, and you're saying that there was a member of the parole board was murdered?
No.
Then who was the person that was murdered you were talking about?
Who was the person that was what?
That was murdered that you were just talking about. I thought you said parole board. She was a member of the parole board.
No, I was just talking about the pro board. I'm sorry, PRO boards. They have a pro board that they people can set them up, and they talk about a particular case, like the John Benet Ramsey case or the Golden State Killer case. And there were a lot of conversations for probably years. I didn't come along and find them until about 2016, 17. But there's been a couple of people on there that said, oh, gee, what if he's on here and he's been listening to what we say about him? And probably he was. He was free at the time, and there was a couple of creepy people out there that had different handles like Catch and Release, and D'Angelo liked to fish. And so long story short, there was the pro boards, and this lady who was murdered from Tulare County had been active on the pro boards. And she was murdered before D'Angelo was caught. It was 2017 of December, and they have not solved that crime.
Oh, wow. Okay, so she was discussing the crime online, and you think D'Angelo was spying on that. He was a member, too, undercover, and he tracked her down and killed her. Yeah,
pretty much. That's what I think.
How about you? Have you ever experienced any kind of threats or suspicions of people, coming after you?
Well, after I basically went back and released my first book, from November of 2017 until February of 2018, I had hang-up calls and breathing calls, and I was like, So I called and spoke to the Sacramento County detective that was in charge of the Maggiore murders, and he said, call your local police department. And I thought, wow, seriously? But anyway, so I did report it. But anyway, it stopped, and of course he was caught in April of 2018. So, you do the best that you can to protect yourself and what you do.
Yeah,
I'm just talking about cases. There's a million people in this true crime business with podcasts and discussions. So,
Yeah, I was having a problem with phone calls one time myself. So what I did was I forwarded the phone calls to the FBI phone number.
You did.
So when they called me, if the FBI picks up, it worked for a few days, but that didn't slow them down too much. Now, in this newest book, Serial Killers, Victims, Families Wait for Answers, the killers and their MOs. Now, you said that there's a lot of unsolved cases in there, but the ones you left, these are all solved cases. So what are the unsolved cases that are in this book?
Well, there are so many. Like I've talked about the Susan Waters case, for example. She was murdered in Auburn, California in 2003, and it's not solved yet. Her sister is looking for some kind of resolve. There's so many.
Well, tell us about that one, Susan Waters. What was the circumstances around her death?
Well, what she did was she was just a really nice, kind lady, from what I can gather, who would give you the shirt off her back. And she went to, if most people know the D'Angelo story, a lot of times what he did was attack around holidays or Labor Day, Thanksgiving, Christmas. There's 4th of July. And the reason he did that was because he knew that law enforcement would be pretty busy. They're busy out there. And this was at the fairgrounds in Auburn. Susan had walked to the fairgrounds and participated out there and had a good day and was on her way home, walking home from the fair. And again, it was a busy weekend for law enforcement, so apparently they were, not noticing. She was taken, and her body was dumped just down the street from the police department right there in Auburn. And that's a place that's familiar to me because I used to hang out there. And I was married right down the street in the church that's in Auburn in 1980, actually. So anyway, and D'Angelo had just been fired from being the cop in Auburn in 1979, and then I was married down the street there in 1980. And there were so many crimes that were committed in Auburn after he was fired. It was almost like he was trying to keep the police chief busy. But this one was, like I said, in 2003, and her sister's waiting for answers. And just the reports that I've read about Susan in particular, about what a nice human she was. She was from Sacramento area, lived in Roseville too, and then moved to Auburn. And a lot of us from Sacramento like the foothills. That's where we go. And that's where D'Angelo ended up, harming people.
How old was Susan Waters on that day?
I think she was about 40, 42, something like that.
Now, what do you find the common age, or the average age of these female victims are?
What's interesting is they're in these cases, they've been all over the board. I think it depends on who he wants to hurt, who he wants to harm. The last lady that I spoke about, I think her name was Debbie, in Tulare County in 2017. I think she was in her 50s. It just depends. But most of the time he went from anywhere from 12 years old up to in their 30s. That was more common, the age.
And what was the motivation? Were these sexually motivated crimes?
Some,
but not all.
I mean, I know he didn't rape everybody he, terrorized or killed, but I talked about sexual burglary. I mean, a lot of guys get high, like BTK got high off the idea of breaking into your house. I mean, it just really thrilled the crap out of him, and so he fantasized about taking it a notch up from being a burglar or just breaking into your space to doing what he did in the end, harming women. So, and they were all over the place age-wise too for him. So.
One time I was talking to this cop, and he was telling me about a domestic violence, how he went to the house for domestic violence, and how he got like a charge, like he got all that big rush out of going into somebody else's house and taking command of the other guy's house, It really? Oh, it really disturbed me the way he was saying it.
Yeah.
Yeah, luckily he wasn't a cop anymore at that point. He had retired early. Otherwise I would have. Yeah.
It's not surprising, though, is it? I mean, seriously,
It's not.
It's about power and control, and some are about power and control.
How many of these killers do you find have law enforcement background?
Well, I don't know about that. I don't know about numbers. I know that there probably have been quite a few who wanted to be a cop and who were not allowed to be one. But statistically, I'm not sure what that would be.
And D'Angelo, what caused him to lose his police employment?
Well, he was arrested in his attack zones for shoplifting a hammer and dog repellent. Yeah, he got a charge out of stealing. He was a burglar. I mean, they had to tie him to a chair to keep him there until they wrote him a citation. So, yeah, I'm sure that was really
wait, describe that.
They
They caught him at the scene and they tied him on a chair in the house.
They tied him to a chair at the store because they're trying to control him until the cops came.
And then the cops only wrote a citation.
Yeah, mm-hmm.
So I guess they untied him. Let him go.
Yeah, and ultimately he was fired, but I say in my book that he probably created a lot of trouble that night when he was so upset about what had happened.
Wow, and you cover that story too in one of your books?
Yeah, it's an Endgame. It talks about what he did, because the cover is fire, and I believe that he was also into burning things down. I mean, there were cars burned out, there were houses burned, different things happen when there are burglaries in Sacramento. So I talk about that too.
Endgame of the most dangerous game, the Golden State Killer. And you said he was involved in arsons too.
Yes. And they don't talk about that much. I mean, there's so much that wasn't talked about in detail. I mean, there was a lot covered during the trial, or not trial, it was basically he admitted what he did. There was a lot covered there. And they did include in his pleadings a lot of the rapes that he had committed that were beyond the statute of limitations. They did that for the victims, and that was a good thing. But it was still not enough. There's just so much that they didn't talk about. So, but what I found though, just out of interest here, the thing that I found interesting is, of course, he couldn't have committed all the crimes in California. There were so many serial killers in California, and many that people never even heard of. And I was amazed, actually, and shocked once again to discover that it's amazing how many serial killers were roaming around the Bay Area, the Sacramento area. It was the L.A. area. It's amazing to me. I mean, murder after murder after murder. Like in Orange County, there was an Orange County murderer. They called him the Orange County Killer at the time. And, he wasn't as meticulous as D'Angelo was. He got caught because he was stupid. But basically, he's in San Quentin now, and his name is Gerald Parker. But he killed in Tustin and Costa Mesa and all these different areas that D'Angelo was around the same kind of areas. There's another guy who was Herman Hobbs. He killed a bunch of people in the Vacaville area and around Sacramento. I mean, I'm amazed. Gerald Gallegos. There's so many serial killers. The Vampire Slayer killer. This is all in Northern California. I mean, how did women get from point A to point B ever and be safe? That's what it looked like, It's crazy.
That was like the home of the Satanic Church and Anton LaVey and Michael Aquino. Did you find any kind of satanic thread through these kind of characters?
Well, I'm just starting to look more into that because besides the Vampire Slayer, but there's also I was looking at the Son of Sam.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and that kind of story. It's like, that maybe there really is something to this in the Manson murders, and just the whole theme of we're going to do this. It's a cult. We're going to, there were things that happened in Sacramento and in Vacaville and different areas where there were cat, killings and different things that were set up to look like satanic murders, and so. That's something I just recently started thinking, I'm going to look further into that because it's interesting anyway. It's an interesting connection.
Yeah, my audience is very familiar with the Maury Terry and the Ultimate Evil, his book, and the Process Church of the Final Judgment, their connections to Son of Sam and Manson and a lot of other stuff. Okay, and it's fascinating that now in the past few years, since the death of Maury Terry, actually, there's kind of like an attempt to rewrite history and whitewash over all this. Maury was right in the middle of all this stuff. Like people were dying. The Roy Raiden murder took place like, well, he woke up one morning, heard it. These are people he knew and were talking to, and suddenly they're being murdered all over the place. And now there's like this effort to like whitewash it. Oh, it never happened. It's all a big mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
I don't get that. There was a saying, something about the truth is always the truth, and a lie is, I mean, it just, what's wrong with the truth?
Well, it seems like some of the people involved in these cults have made a lot of money over the years, and now they're attempting to rewrite history. But I've never heard of the Vampire Slayer. What's that story?
Well, that's obviously you got me on the cuff here. I'm trying to recall his name right off the top. I got a picture in my face of his face. In Sacramento, there was a gentleman wandering around, and he was killing people. Not for a very long time, though. He was caught fairly quickly. But he killed in different states, different areas, and he would actually bury some of his sort of like death equipment in holes and have it different places. But I'm trying to remember his name off the top of my head. There's a lot of information in my brain. More coffee. See, I'm on the West Coast, and I haven't had enough coffee. Anyway, he just killed people. He was really sick. He drank their blood. That's basically what it's about.
Yeah, and unfortunately, when you try and Google Vampire Slayer, the only thing that comes up is Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It wasn't Buffy, right? No. His name wasn't Buffy, was it there, Aunt Penn?
No. See, now I haven't written about him yet, so that's why I'm like, okay, there were two different guys that come up in my head when it comes to that kind of stuff. And one of them, like I said, he was just in the Sacramento area, and he was just a really creepy guy.
Richard Trenton Chase.
There you go. Yeah,
I had another guest talk about him once. I had another guest come on and tell me that story.
I don't have my computer in front of me.
And people can Google this guy, Richard Trenton Chase, and look at this picture of this guy, man. If I ran him into the street, I'd call him Vampire Slayer without knowing anything about him.
Oh yeah. Really creepy guy, like I said. But he wasn't active for very long at all, compared to some of them.
Because he got caught.
But it's funny. I believe he killed himself in jail. Like I said, I've got a lot of stuff in my head this morning about these different cases I've been working on. But he was not around very long.
That seems to be another pattern with these. I'm thinking of Ariel Castro, who killed himself in jail too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really weird case, man. Well, did you know that?
Aren't they all?
Well, he's got these three girls held and kidnapped in his house, and his daughter knew a couple of those girls, and she would run away from home and hide out at his house. This girl's chained up in there, right? And then later on, she went and she stabbed her own baby. She went to prison for killing her own baby. Not killing, she stabbed
it's insane.
her.
Yeah.
Runs in the family.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, it takes about, in my opinion, it takes at least 10 years to catch some of these serial killers. But some of the ones that I found interesting, and I like, believe it or not, I like to investigate the murders that happen in national parks. Right. And one of those cases, the Carrie Stainer case. And there are others. There's a trailside killer he's still alive. He's in his 90s, a guy who killed a bunch of women off Mount Tamalpais, and he was caught, and he's been in prison, and like I said, he's in his 90s. Just a lot of different serial killers during that time frame in California. Here it is. I've got Richard Chase, the Vampire Sacramento, Rodney Acala, let's see, Randy Kraft, this hitchhiker, this scorecard killer. There was Richard Ramirez, of course.
Yeah.
There's a guy. Richard.
I did some shows about Carrie Stainer. I did about 4 or 5 of them.
I bet.
Yeah, and there was a lot of activity going up there in Yosemite with a group of bikers and meth and all kind of stuff. And he was the older brother of Steven Stainer. Yeah. I Know My Name is Steven from that book and that TV show.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I thought that the way that Steven died was really sad after all he'd been through, that he ended up dying so young.
Motorcycle accident, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Motorcycle accident. Yep.
Yeah, that's a shame. Hey, you mentioned Rodney Alcala. What can you, the dating game killer? I got some info on that, but let me hear what you got to say.
Well, I just think he was such a creep.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought he was a creep from the get-go before he got old with, long gray hair. But he's just awful. I don't know. There's just...
He was a film student working in Roman Polanski's class, okay? So it brings up the whole Manson stuff there, too.
Yeah.
He was a Roman Polanski film student. He's bringing these girls, these model girls, they want to be models and stuff, back to his mother's house. It's a 2-bedroom house, and he's killing them and chopping up in his house. Where's the mother? She doesn't notice this? She doesn't hear the screaming?
Yeah, I know. Sometimes wonder. Well, back in the day, and I mean, before these guys were noticed, I mean, back in the 1950s, you didn't hear about this kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And California is a beautiful state. I mean, it was insane how many serial killers, like I said. Young women used to try to figure out how to negotiate movement, you know what I mean? Like from the car in the parking lot to home to getting inside. And I mean, it really didn't feel safe at all. Literally, that's why I left where I grew up. So,
and in the new book, Serial Killer Victims, Families Wait for Answers, you talk about how a lot of these bodies were dumped in the woods and national forests in California.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And that really is why the cover of this book has the forest, because, like, for instance, Donna Lass, I mean, it was I figured she was either dumped in a lake or she was supposed to be a Zodiac killer victim, and we still don't know to this day. But the Placer County sheriffs have had her skull in their possession since 1986, and she was dumped in the forest over near Soda Springs, which at one point I actually talked about that in my last book, actually, where I thought she might be either in the lake, Donner Lake or Lake Tahoe, or she was dumped over off Highway 80 on the way from where South Shore was around to the North Shore to Highway 80. And then you go a little bit farther, and it's right there in the forest. And that's where her skull was found. I don't know what happened to the rest of her remains. I have not talked to them yet. But that was in 2023 that they finally said, yes, it was connected through DNA. Of course, my question is always like, well, since you've been able to figure out DNA since about 2000, 2001, how come it took till 2023 to tell us that, that it was Donna, right? So.
Well, I think back in Vegas, there was a scandal. It was like 1,000 untested rape kits, in Vegas. It just sat there and lying around,
Yeah, I wrote about that, too, in one of my books.
But do you remember how many it was? It was a bunch of them, right?
Oh, it's thousands and thousands across the country. The Joyful Heart Foundation was by Mariska Hargitay, who's from Law and Order Special Victims Unit, began Joyful Heart, and they have been insisting and helping to get rape kits tested across the country, for the last 20 years. So it's improving, I think. So we'll see. But, yeah, they found out that they're connected. I mean, serial rapists, decade after decade, they've got all these untested kits sitting there, and it's like, oh, this guy, committed crimes against 5 women in this decade and 5 more in this decade, and on it went. And it's like, to me, it was a no-brainer. Yes, of course, they're going to continue because they're not caught. So.
And that's such a wealth of information to be analyzing and cross-referencing, and solving other crimes, just.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing. I wrote about it too. It's been a while since I wrote it, but the statistics on how many crimes they actually solved once they started to test these rape kits was amazing, you know. So.
And these are the kind of crimes we want them working on.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. Yep. So it's been an interesting journey. Yeah, I have. I've gone through all the different emotions in investigating this stuff for the last decade, really, in depth. There are times where you have to get up and walk away and leave it alone for 3 or 4 days, or sometimes a week if it's really depressing. But it's very devastating, really, to realize how many crimes against women and girls there are and have been. Statistics have gone up again. Believe it or not, the statistics on rape started to climb again. And I thought, wow, seriously, even with DNA? You know, if I was that kind of person, I would be afraid to get caught. But, you know, the way the world is at the moment, it also doesn't surprise me that those statistics started to go up, crimes against women. So it's just, you know, the nature of the beast. But it really is something that we as a society could probably try to kind of get in front of, you know, realize who's at risk and try to help young men who are having difficulties in some way or have childhoods where their parents are, you know, causing them to have issues of some sort, like BTK. He came from a fairly normal family. He had several brothers behind him, and he's the oldest brother. And, you know, everybody else was fine. But he had some issues, had some mother kind of issues, and, you know, just whatever his chemical imbalance in his brain was or whatever his pathology came from, he became BTK.
Yeah, just think if we really made an effort for, you know, medical health care for people, you know, treating people with addictions, treating people with obsessions, mental health treatment. Yeah. How many problems would be avoided and solved with just these basic little steps, you know?
Oh yeah, it seems like it's like sooner or later we might learn from our experience and change things, but it seems to be very slow.
No profit. I guess there's no profit. You know what I mean?
No kidding. Yeah. Well, you know, I worked in the jail for a year. I was trying to teach substance abuse type people how to stay sober, you know, health education. And it's a revolving door. And the police that, you know, they just house them. They don't really care if you come and help them. And I said that, yes, I did. You know, unless it's changed in the last decade. I suppose there are programs in place in the country where they actually do their best to try to help people and try to make sure they don't come back. But I think that's probably the exception and not the rule.
Yeah, they're not even trying. They make so much money off the phone calls and the ramen noodles and stuff like that. These jails are making a fortune. Hey.
Ramen noodles, I wouldn't have thought of that. But anyway.
And the honey buns. Well, they charge like $5 for that stuff, man. A pack of ramen noodles when you buy it in the jail. You know, or toothpaste.
And they're bad for you on top of that.
Yeah, it's crazy. But back to serial killer victims, families await for answers. The killers and their MOs. Modus operandi. Do you find there's a thread of all these guys, the same MO in many, many cases?
Yeah, pretty much. It's interesting to, I think that they also learn from each other. They read what they can about each other, maybe even compete with each other in some ways. But they have, you know, like I said, it's a serial breaking and entering. You know, it's one of those things, they get a rush off of it, power and control, you know, coming into your home or whatever their issue is. Like the Green River Killer, he'd just pick women up off the street, you know. That was easier in a lot of ways than some of these guys who come into your house. But I just, you know, they just get a rush off of it, I guess. That's the common thread. And that once they've done it, you know, like one of the ones I was just listening to, the Happy Face Killer, he was saying that after his first murder, he thought, well, he would never do it again. And then it got easy, of course. So he kept doing it. So.
And that's just the rush from the murder. There's no rape on top of it. There's no sexual gratification. There is.
Well, usually there seems to be. I mean, usually it seems like they it's a rape, strangle, kill. BTK, what was that? Bind, torture, kill.
Yeah.
So.
I probably asked you about him last time you were on BTK. But what do you make of those pictures he took? Those selfies, he's buried up to his neck. He's hogtied.
Well, we did talk about that. And,
I can't get over that.
And I know he. Yeah, I know. He did do it himself. I mean, I don't think anybody was there taking his picture, like you said. But, no. I know that he spent a lot of time trying to set all that up, from what I've read. So,
God bless him. Anyway. He was very successful. I don't think I could pull that one off.
Anyway. Different kinds of people out there, for sure.
And in the book, you talk about Ted Bundy as well.
Yeah, I'm going to briefly go through that. I've talked about Ted in a couple of my books, a couple chapters here and there, just because I really thought that the Golden State Killer in particular was paying attention to Ted, because Ted was, there was a lot of stuff in the news at the time. He was being arrested. He was escaping. All this different stuff happened. He had the trial. And that whole time, the Golden State Killer was running around, doing stuff too. And the murder of Janelle Cruz happened the night that the movie Desperate Strangers, I believe it was, came out, and she was murdered in Irvine, California, the same night that movie had aired. And I thought, God, did guys see that movie and just couldn't resist going out and doing that? It was rather a weird coincidence. But I really do think that they follow each other to a certain extent, and read the newspapers. They love to read about themselves. They like to read about other crimes. I think the Golden State Killer wrote anonymous letters to the Sacramento papers, or asked about, gee, did this murder get solved yet? Literally, I think he did. And they'd answer it, no, that hasn't been solved yet. It's amazing how many times that happened, and I can track it on newspaper articles, historical. So
wait, so he would write a letter to the newspaper and put his return address on there and wait for a return letter?
No, They had secret witness, which is they have articles in the newspaper that talked about crimes that happened, and you can write in and ask about a crime, and somebody anonymously would write in. In 2009, there was one. I think it was about. I'm trying to remember which one it was. There were several in a row over the years that were murders that were never solved, like the Susan Waters. There was Susan Jacobson also. Susan Jacobson was taken in 2013, and she's never been seen since. And there was a letter sent to Secret Witness, and it was like, has this ever been solved? And it's always an anonymous letter writer who asks about the crime, and the area is right where D'Angelo was living. And so I thought, I bet he gets his kicks now that he can't really write letters to law enforcement or the media by writing these letters to the newspaper and then having it be published. Literally, that's what I think. And so I've written about that too, just how I think it's connected.
And that was the Green River Killer who wrote letters?
No, the Golden State Killer.
Golden State Killer. So I can think of Son of Sam, Zodiac, and now Golden State. They would write. Any other people would write letters to the press?
Well, I think quite a few of them did.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, I do.
It would seem that would be a good avenue of investigation. Everybody's writing these letters. Ask about these murders. Let's track them down. Do some DNA on those envelopes.
The Zodiac did. I mean, he wrote to the media.
Yeah.
There's just been different ones here and there throughout time, all across the country.
What do you think of their IQs? You see these TV shows, these movies, and they're portrayed as these brilliant masterminds. What do you make of that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think they have above average intelligence for sure. I think they have a decent IQ, especially the ones that are meticulous and they're really able to sort of live behind other people and act like they're normal. and then go out and do what they do. It's like it's compartmentalized, and I think they really do have IQs of probably between about 125 and 150. It depends, I don't think they're stupid. I think the ones that aren't really together, like this one guy, Gerald Parker, I mean, he was what do you call it, lazy or just didn't care. Or, I mean, eventually Ted Bundy didn't seem to care if he got caught. For God's sake, he goes to Florida, where they'll put you to death if you murder anybody. And then he goes and, it's like a frenzied attack at the sorority house there. And he was just, he wasn't organized, meticulous. He was absolutely it was almost like he wanted to get caught or want to be stopped. I don't know what that was about, because he really could have gone anywhere in the United States and just vanished. And what did he do? He goes to Florida and, big finale there, and gets caught. So
yeah, I interviewed the only survivor that was attacked by them that night there in that sorority house, and the boldness to go in there he walked in there unarmed,
Yeah.
Yeah.
He just grabbed whatever he could grab on the way in. I think it was a fireplace log.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah.
So I don't know what that was about, because he really could have vanished. I mean, he escaped a couple times back in the day. I don't think he could escape now, but back then, and he really could have been free for a lot longer. And it was almost like he was like, I'm done. This is it. And I just don't understand why he did that to himself. Why go to Florida where they're going to kill you?
Well, suicide by justice, suicide by court.
Yeah, exactly.
But you mentioned how they can put up a double front and fool the people around them. Do you think they're really fooling the people around them, or do you think maybe some of these people around them kind of knew what was going on? Like Rodney Cowell's mother had to know.
Yeah. Well, I don't think BTK's wife knew anything at all. She was completely shocked. I think it's highly likely that D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer's wife, knew he was doing something like burglaries, or he was doing, something. But I don't know how specific, what she knew was. But yeah, I think some of them have to have a clue, but they're probably terrified. I mean, let's say, for instance, the J.C. Lee Dugard kidnapping, and she's down in Antioch for 18 years with this guy, Philip Gallegos. And his wife knew exactly she helped him take J.C., right?
Right.
So she knew all about it. She was complicit all the way. She's in prison now, too. But, some of them are like that. I mean, Gerald Gallegos, for instance, his wife, Charlene, she knew. She helped him get women to get in the car. And she was put in prison, and she's free now, by the way, and he's dead. But this was also Sacramento area, Auburn, all in that same area during the same time frame that the Golden State Killer was running around, same area, on the same highways, and he was only active there for 2 years and got caught. So, there are the women who helped them do these things as well.
Yeah. And they never get as much time either.
No. And really, sincerely, I believe she was released, Charlene Gallegos. Gerald Gallegos was her husband. They took a couple of girls from Country Club shopping mall, and there were several others after that. And, I don't know if she just, I don't know. That's a whole other story. But she was punished along with him, but she did testify against him. But the thing of it is she really didn't get as much time, and she really did get released back into the same areas that she came from.
Yeah, that Homolka case, too, up there in Canada, she's out now walking around,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we're almost running out of time. So serial killer victims, families wait for answers, the killer and their MOs. Is there anything about this book I haven't answered that you want the audience to know about?
Like I said, I'm hoping they find it interesting. It's about the cold cases that are out there that are still needing to be solved, and what the victims' families feel like after 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And then also, again, like I said, I haven't picked the final serial killers that I'm going to put in the book, but I don't want it to be a stock thing where everybody knows everything about all these serial killers. There are many others that are unknown or not even talked about that were running amok at the same time, and they racked up some pretty big numbers as far as murdering women and girls as well. And so, like I said, I hope it's interesting to people. I hope it solves a few more unsolved crimes. Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's what motivates me.
We've been talking to Ann Penn. That's ANNEPENN. You can find her at annpenn.wordpress.com. You can find her at Ann Penn on Twitter. And if you go to Amazon, she's written 6 books, right? You got 6 books and plus the one coming out?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. I can add. And what do you call it? The other thing, too, is when is this book going to finally hit the prints and hot off the presses?
I would say it's probably going to be another 45 to 60 days from right now. Maybe sooner. Depends on how much I get interrupted.
Okay, as soon as it
my
hits
life.
I hear you. It's a hurricane coming your way someday. But on the fire, like you were telling me about, you survived those fires over there.
Yeah.
But as soon as it hits the presses, let me know, and we'll repeat this episode for people to run right out and get this book. Serial Killer Victims, Families Wait for Answers, The Killer, The Killers, and Their MOs, The Green River Killer, Ted Bundy, Zodiac Killer, Golden State Killer, and BTK, and more, by Ann Penn. Ann Penn, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.